80% of the fish that Americans are eating actually come from China.
Even a lot of our fish that's labeled as like wild Alaskan seafood is processed in China.
I'm sure people ask you all the time, Andrew, how can you run a business in California?
A nightmare's not even the right word to use. It's an absolute disaster. It poured bleach over the whole bluefin tuna right there.
It's completely enraging, Andrew.
Yeah, big food has taken over the commercial food supply chain, so it's all processed. Nice restaurants, too.
How do you feel about the tariffs?
The tariffs are great.
You're not worried that the tariffs are going to hurt you?
If we actually start to allow open ocean permits, we will literally take over the world's seafood industry. We will continue being the strongest country in the world, and it can be done through food.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So the last time we were in touch during the lockdowns, because birds of a feather flocked together, especially in California. And you've been doing amazing things since then. But, you know, there's some people who may not know your story and your background. So maybe just give us a quick briefing into how did you get into becoming our favorite food guy?
Well, I'll try and keep this somewhat brief. So I did not grow up in a world where grandma was making fresh pasta and I was sitting on her lap making ravioli, which is kind of the cliched story that chefs go, like, I was 7 years old sitting on grandma's lap and I knew I wanted to be a chef. I grew up as part of the microwave generation, right? 2 working parents. My mother owned her own business. My father was working from top to bottom. I wouldn't say we were latchkey kids, but there was not a culinary angle to our upbringing. However, I fell in love with food early. I actually remember being sick at home from school, watching like the old PBS cooking shows, right? Yang Kan Cook, Jacques Pepin, Julia Child, and just falling in love with it. I used to skip school on purpose, say I was sick just so I could stay at home and try and cook. It was fun. It was science, right? And make a mess and then clean it up before my parents came home. But never thought it would be a career. My first job as I was growing up was in restaurants, catering, washing dishes, you know, basic first job for a kid. Then I went to a small liberal arts college up in Maine, very small, Bates College, and I was studying philosophy and piano performance and, you know, kind of learning how to protest capitalism. I spent most of my time up there working in restaurants, right? 80 hours a week at one point, and working on the lobster docks and understanding the seafood supply chain because I was working at seafood restaurants. And I had this kind of aha moment, in addition to the fact that I was dealing with severe stomach issues where I couldn't go out and do much, right? So I found myself spending more time working in restaurants because I was in one place. I didn't have to go anywhere. I knew there was like a restroom there or a place of refuge. And I realized, like, I don't want to study anymore. I'm spending more time in restaurants. Maybe I'll learn about this kitchen thing, this restaurant thing. So I dropped out of school after 2 years and just kind of went on my culinary journey, traveling around the United States and internationally, eating, apprenticing, working under different chefs. Ultimately went back to school and got my culinary arts degree, my food service management degree, food marketing, the business degree, did all that. And now here I am.
Why did you have stomach issues? This seems to be a big part of your life story.
It is. And you know what's funny is I haven't really talked about this at all. I've always kept this to myself as being the genesis of what got me in the kitchen. But since Maha is such a big piece of our national conversation now, I've kind of been telling my story more. It was all the processed food I grew up with. Looking back on it now, it was like the fact that I was eating everything out of a box, microwaved meals, we were, you know, I was born in 1980. I feel like we were kind of the beginning generation that got all of that fake food. Like that's what we were being fed as we were growing up. We were told that it was healthy, and I kept eating that way. And it wasn't until I got into the world of food that I learned that changing my diet might be able to help me through a lot of these stomach issues. And I was ultimately able to heal it to some degree by way of food.
It's so interesting because, I was born and raised around the same time, and I associated the microwave food as a tool for independence, right? It's like you can take care of yourself because you can just pop something into the microwave and, you know, that's a great thing. And so we would eat all this garbage thinking that we're taking great care of ourselves. But you just had, severe stomach aches because you ate processed foods? I mean, were you diagnosed with something?
Yeah, so I remember I was like 17 when it got really bad, and it was like right when I went to college or before I went to college, and I had to do, by the time I was 17, I had already done like 4 colonoscopies, I'd done 2 upper GIs, blood tests, blood work, everything you name it.
Severe.
Oh yeah, was in and out of the hospital. When I got to college, like it got so bad and it was so crippling that it created such bad anxiety that I would never want to go anywhere, that immediately, and I went to the doctor's office at the college, the first thing they wanted to put me on was Valium, Xanax. Like,
oh, anxiety.
Yeah,
they would say it's anxiety.
They were giving out Valium like they were vitamins. This was I look back on it and I'm like, this is crazy. But I never could do that, right? Like I knew that was just a Band-Aid. So I never got it. At one point, they wanted to put me on Paxil, antidepressants, because they said all my neurotransmitters were overactivated in my intestine, and therefore the neurotransmitters needed to be calmed, and that would calm my stomach. None of that stuff worked.
Wow.
But it was just immediately go to the pills because the stomach was so bad, and I had no solution.
So how are you now? Do you still have these severe stomach aches?
No, I'm probably 95% healed.
And how? What have you done to heal yourself?
I eat real foods. I've completely cut out. Well, actually, I've not completely cut out, but I've cut out like 90 to 95% of seed oils. They always slip in. Moved a lot more towards keto, carnivore, but not eating the processed foods. Right? It's the chemicals. It's the food dyes. It's the highly refined carbs that are in all of our foods. So cutting back on that significantly, increasing my protein intake, a lot of seafood. That's healed me.
Wow.
Having 4 kids, maybe I just can't pay attention to it as much.
Right, as masking your pain.
Yeah.
And so you were working on the lobster docks. By the way, what's that like? I can't imagine what your hands looked like.
Well, my hands were horrible because my first job, so the restaurant was right on the water. They would bring in the lobster boats right there. It was the dock, and the restaurant then had a huge deck, and the guy who got to cook on the deck, you could only cook on the deck before you were allowed to cook in the inside of the restaurant. And I started as a dishwasher, then a server, and then they said, we'll give you the opportunity to be the deck cook. Now, what the deck cook does is they shuck oysters and cherry stone clams, so eating raw clams. Boats would come up from Portland, Maine, and there'd be 100 people on the boats that wanted to eat and go right back to Portland. So I had 30 minutes to feed people, and they all wanted oysters and cherry stones. So all I was doing was stabbing myself and getting shellfish.
I think every real man has to go through that experience instead of going to college.
And then I would help like pull the lobsters and do this. So my hands were swollen for an entire summer because I had a shellfish infection in both hands, but I had to keep working.
Wow.
So,
and then you ended up moving out to California and you started, was it a food truck business?
Well, so what happened was that I traveled around and I worked all over the East Coast, lived in Colorado, went to Johnson & Wales there to get my culinary arts degree, to actually take all the courses I took at the college and formalize it into a degree. And so I worked all around the world. And now I ended up back in New Jersey, which is where I'm from, in 2006. I was running restaurants there, and then the economy tanked in 2008, 2009. I lost my job because the restaurant shut down, and I said, I'm either going to go into New York City and open my own restaurant, or I'm going to follow through on a passion project of mine. Well, at the time, they were looking for, because nonprofits still had money when the economy tanked, and there was a nonprofit program with the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach where they were starting a sustainable seafood program. It was funded by the Pacific Life Foundation, where they wanted chefs to train and educate other chefs on not just sustainable seafood, but how to educate guests on eating the right types of seafood. So I always loved the ocean, always loved marine conservation, always loved seafood. I have a marketing degree too, which I ultimately went and got at some point in this journey. And I'm a chef. So I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity. It's supposed to be a 3-year program. I ran that program at the Aquarium of the Pacific. And then when the grant was up, I said, nobody out there is doing what I've been talking about. I'm just going to do it. I tried to raise money for a restaurant that I created in my head called Slapfish. Fish so fresh it'll slap you. So it was like really good seafood at the kind of cost and convenience of faster food. No one would give me money, so I went down to a local food truck lot and paid some guy like $3,000 to use his food truck for a week and started selling lobster rolls from my buddies up in Maine who I had send it to me, selling lobster rolls and fish tacos out of the back of a food truck. That was 2011, and I went from one food truck, opened 3 that summer, then moved to my first brick and mortar in 2012, and then we opened over that time period a couple different concepts, but about 40 restaurants.
Wow.
In about an 8-year period.
Are most of the restaurants in California?
They were all over the country. So we actually, I opened some in Dubai, I opened in London, I opened all over the world, these concepts, because I licensed it out and I franchised it. And then we sold our share of that company in 2 years ago.
What is it like running a restaurant chain or a restaurant in general in California, especially given that you have experience opening restaurants all over the country and the world? Is it an exaggeration that California is a nightmare for restaurant owners?
A nightmare is not even the right word to use. It's an absolute disaster. It's the worst place to do business unless you're a massive, large, multi-unit restaurant group or a huge corporation that can work hand in glove with the government. They hate businesses here in California. We deal with regulations that you won't see in any other state.
Like?
PAGA, the Public Attorneys General's Act, which basically, without getting into all the legal detail, PAGA gives employees the opportunity to sue you for anything. And by virtue of the mere suit, you will pay at least six figures, regardless of whether it's made up or not.
Yeah, the part about PAGA that I think is most mind-boggling is that they can sue you and not even claim what they're suing you for. It's just, we are just suing you with the hopes that the attorneys will come up with something.
They don't even need to come up with something. I don't think people realize that. We had an employee. So after we sold Slapfish in that restaurant, my wife and I said, we're not going to open another restaurant ever again. We're going to travel with the family, etc. 2 days later, we signed a lease on a restaurant. So now we own a whole nother restaurant concept that we're growing in Southern California. When we opened that restaurant, we had a bartender who got drunk in the first hour of working, broke a glass bottle against the wall, harassed women, started cursing at my wife. We fired him. We get a lawsuit from him saying, you didn't pay me vacation pay. He worked for an hour. You didn't pay me breaks, all this stuff. So it's a form lawsuit. All of it was proven false. We had the text messages, everything. The guy only worked for an hour, and we actually paid him for 10 hours worth of work because we felt bad. So he was an alcoholic. So the lawsuit went on. They were asking for about $500,000. And when I went to the attorney, I go, but this is all made up. They said, it doesn't matter.
It's just a shakedown.
It's a legal shakedown in conjunction with the Labor Department, the state, and the trial attorneys. Now, PAGA was just reformed, but I will say California is the only state that has PAGA. And even in New Jersey, an incredibly liberal state, it was shut down at the Supreme Court level. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court here in California, and it passed.
Yeah, so not that many people deal with PAGA. And most of us who are listening in may be familiar with the tort reform that is required in order to run a business in California. But I'm curious from your perspective on the restaurant side. Maybe it's my wild imagination, but I think of restaurants as a mafia.
Yeah.
I just think it is so hard to deal with the supply chain and the food and the labor and all of that. Can you let us peek behind the curtain and tell us what you're dealing with?
Well, yeah. I mean,
pretend this is your therapy session.
Oh, boy. How much time do we have? I need a couch. So it's everything, right? So it's the people element, right? So you have the human element, which is totally unpredictable, right? Like that's the variable that you can't plan anything for. And most of the time you spend is with the people element because it hasn't been mechanized yet. You can't replace people in the restaurant industry. You can't work remote. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't just replace somebody with a call center in another country. So it's the human element, which is just emotion, right? Then you have all the regulations coming down from California that change sometimes by the week. So you have to stay up to date on it.
Food related too?
Well, in the food world, you get even more regulations because you have the alcohol element, right? So now they're requiring that you provide roofie kits in the restaurants. Restaurants can't provide plastic gift cards anymore. The way in which you present fees on your menu, whether it's taxes or tips or automatic gratuities now under 731 is regulated through the state of California. Employee breaks. It might be that you can only work 4 hours before you have to take a mandatory break. And then the state will change it to 3.5 hours. And you didn't know that, right? That could change week by week. So the speed with which they change the kind of legislative framework of how to run a business changes so quickly. You're spending 90% of your time just reading through employee paperwork.
What are we eating in restaurants? What are we really eating?
Big food has taken over the commercial food supply chain. So all restaurants are serving pretty much this. Now, by all, right, there's always outliers like us who go and try and get food direct from the source. It's all coming from a Cisco or a US Foods or one of those big food distributors, and they're even merging. And that's all coming down from big food. So you spend so much time doing the other things to keep your business open that when it comes to buying food, you can't go hit the streets and find the right products. So it's all processed, right? It's all that big box stuff. It's got 1 million different ingredients listed on there. Most of them come in massive cases, so the chefs don't even read what's in the products. Because labor costs have gotten so high, you're seeing chefs now put value-added products on their menu. So they'll, instead of getting fresh fish and breading it themselves, they'll buy it pre-frozen, pre-breaded. Nice restaurants too. I mean, there was one in LA, I don't want to call them out, but they got busted about 6 years ago. This was like $100 a plate restaurant for using like they would buy all their food in bags and microwave it and then put it on really nice plates and put some chives on there and maybe a rosemary sprig, charge $100 a plate. I mean, it was microwaved bagged food.
Wow.
So,
I mean, I guess as you explain this, you're dealing with an onslaught of bureaucratic HR, human capital issues. And even if you want to do the right thing as a restaurant owner, how many hours in a day do you have? And so you're sourcing fresh food, but almost everything comes through this big food conglomerate.
yeah, the food mafia.
The food mafia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then how viable would it be anyway for a restaurant to try to get fresh fish? Well, let's say.
I mean, it's virtually impossible. When I had Slapfish, we were getting local fishermen that were bringing in all the seafood for us, and then we would have to get a receiver's license, and they had to have a distributor's license, and then the health department would want to see paperwork for every single piece of fish that was brought in, and most of these fishermen are like, we're just dropping the seafood, you deal with it. And then you have to understand that gauntlet of regulation to be able to buy it fresh. Now, I'm kind of sometimes a ask for forgiveness, not permission guy, but I would never serve anything bad. We had a situation once where, and just to give you an example, I remember one of our tuna fishermen brought in this 150-pound bluefin. It was like 4 a.m. He texts me. I got out of bed. He's like, meet me at the restaurant. I'm pulling the truck up. We just pulled it out of the water. The guy's so tired, and he's like, I'll be back in 5 or 6 hours with the paperwork, and he had his license. So just randomly, the health department happens to come in that morning at 9 a.m., and we have this massive bluefin tuna in our refrigerator. He's like, where's the paperwork for this? And I'm talking to him. I got to get it from the guy. He's probably still sleeping. He didn't get home till 6 a.m., et cetera. Poured bleach over the whole bluefin tuna right there. Wasted.
Why?
Because we didn't have the paperwork.
It's just to punish you?
To punish everybody, yeah.
That is unbelievable.
Well, it's disgusting. I mean, it's wasted food. I would have given it to him. He could have thrown it in the back of his Mazda 323 and taken it home.
It's completely enraging, Andrew.
Yeah. And that story is emblematic of that's
like a daily.
That's everything. I could tell you 500 more just like that.
How likely is it if I'm going to a fish restaurant that I'm actually getting fresh fish? I mean, I'm reading in the data here that 80% of the fish that Americans are eating actually come from China. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 80% is imported, whether it directly comes from China or whether it's Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, any of those kind of Eastern countries. But China does own most of the processing. So even if it was caught in Vietnam, it's probably processed through China and then shipped elsewhere. Even a lot of our fish that's labeled as like wild Alaskan seafood is processed in China.
Explain that. What does that mean? So the fishermen will catch it in the United States oceans and they will ship it to China to process?
Ship it to China to process, and then they'll flash freeze it, which, by the way, frozen, when you say fresh seafood, there's no definition of fresh. So all the sushi you're eating is frozen, but that's good because freezing kills the parasites, right? So actually, with our technology being so advanced, flash freezing or freezing at sea is not a bad thing. So I need to throw that out there. When they ship it over and they flash freeze and process it, and they process it in China and send it back, it's Alaskan caught. It was caught in Alaskan waters. And it'll say on the box, like in fine print, processed in China. But it's marketed as like wild Alaskan seafood.
Yes.
And I'm not coming down on Alaska, right? Because wild Alaskan seafood's amazing. It could be anywhere. Could be New England. And the way in which we label in the United States is very, very manipulative. And that's why I talk about education and labeling laws, because we think we're helping and we're buying from Alaskan fishermen, which I guess in a way we are, but we still want to be able to support those that are also processing it here in the United States. There's a broken incentive structure. I always say we need to change things by way of the incentive structure because it's cheaper to ship it over to China and they use slave labor and they process it for cheaper and they manipulate their currency and then they can send it back and it still undercuts what it would have cost if we used union workers here in the United States. We paid the health insurance and all the things that are required by virtue of all this regulation.
Right, and they don't have Mr. Bleach walking into their...
They don't have Mr. Bleach.
Right.
No, although they might put bleach on it. Most of the seafood that comes through, 98% of the seafood that comes through internationally is not inspected by the FDA. And when they do random subsamples, private companies, they find one of the first things they find on all the seafood is bleach.
So 90% or 80% of our seafood gets processed through China where it's not all China. Or outside of the United States. It is brought to the United States. Here, we scrutinize the fishermen and the restaurant owners on every little detail, but
Yeah.
the vast majority of what we're eating actually comes from other countries, and we're not scrutinizing them.
Yeah, it's culinary NIMBYism, right? So as long as it's not happening here, we don't care what's happening over there.
Why are we not fishing more here and processing here in the United States? So you have the labor law issues. What about the environmentalists? Are we allowed to fish as much as we want or possibly need, or do we need to rely on China for those markets?
Well, the U.S. fisheries are overregulated, right? So what we're doing is it's not just the quota system, and by quota system I mean what the scientists will do through the National Marine Fisheries Service is they will say, this stock is at its maximum sustainable yield, therefore you can catch 100,000 pounds this season, and they give it out to a bunch of fishermen. But then what they'll say is and you also need to pay for a fishery observer on your boat, which is $100,000 a year, which comes from the fishermen, not the government. And then they'll say, and then also you need to use these new hooks that the environmentalists demand. And you have to do this, and you have to do this, and it's all on the cost of the fishermen. Eventually, they're just hanging up their fishing poles and saying, we're out, we're done. And then that spot is being backfilled by this international seafood. We need to amplify our local fishermen and give them what they need in order to continue fishing, and we need to deregulate. Because here's the thing. Nobody's going to take care of the ocean better than the fishermen. We don't need the government. They're sitting in an office in D.C. If you go up into Maine, those guys, they know that if they overfish the Maine lobster, their kids aren't going to have a stock by which they can create and have a career.
The ocean is their world.
It's their world. In addition to the fact the ocean, especially the U.S. ocean, is one of the most resilient organisms on the earth. And it will rehabilitate itself, even in the event that there was overfishing. We saw it with swordfish. We saw it with the Atlantic cod. But also, I got to throw this out there. Sorry to go wild on this.
This is fascinating.
Is farming, fish farming, right?
Yes, explain that to me. And while you're explaining that, can you explain to me what does sustainable fishing actually mean? Because it feels like one of those terms that are like a Trojan horse trying to manipulate us.
It is. It's a greenwash term. Sustainability basically just means that the fish isn't at risk of being overfished. It's not going to go extinct.
Okay.
Now, environmental groups have hijacked that term to add all these new definitions. It's a bill. It's a bill in Congress, and everybody's got to throw their pork in there. Sustainability also means that the fishing method doesn't harm the surrounding ecosystem. Sustainability also means that the supply chain doesn't have slave labor. Sustainability also means, right, you see how you can keep adding definitions to it?
Well, does sustainability mean that we don't fish in the United States and we rely on China for 80% of our seafood?
No, and that's the point, is that we have overcomplicated the issue so much by wordsmithing definitions that make us feel good, like sustainability, that it's just like, well, screw it. We'll buy it from over there. We'll let an organization put a label on there that says this is sustainable, and then we'll feel good buying it back.
Wow. So what do you think is the way to do sustainable fishing in America?
Okay, well, number one, the U.S. fisheries are the most sustainable fisheries of any fisheries in the world by virtue of the Magnuson-Stevenson Act in 1976, which mandates and gives the National Marine Fisheries Service under NOAA the power to set these catch quotas. So it's already stitched into our constitution of seafood, right?
Do you think the quotas are reasonable or unreasonable?
I think the quotas are too tight. I think we can fish more.
We could fish more.
But even let's assume we don't.
Okay.
We have the ability to provide every American with 30 pounds per capita of seafood every single year in perpetuity, and we don't. So we need to deregulate so that those fishermen can make more money and it actually becomes a vibrant industry, and we start buying U.S. wild seafood. Number two, aquaculture, fish farming. We're one of the only developed countries that doesn't have a national regulatory framework for fish farming in our open ocean. Now, I know that sounds like a bad word, but we're not going to do it. Fish farming, that's disgusting. And Sierra Club and all these other environmental organizations are like, no way, not in our ocean. But then we buy 80% of it overseas where 65% of that is farmed. So it's like, we're going to eat it anyways. Why not do it ourselves and do it the right way? So we need to establish a regulatory framework for open ocean aquaculture through the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Department of Fish and Game. That's up to the experts. And then we need to fish farm in the right way. It's not fish swimming in their own poop. Here's how you do it. And we've done it through kind of environmental experimentation here in the U.S. You actually can raise fish, the hatchlings, in a closed contained system. and you can release them into the wild. It's called stock fortification. It's how they brought back the California white sea bass, which at one point was commercially extinct until they started to fortify the stock, put it back in the ocean, and then it kind of rehabilitated. Alaskan seafood, 60% of it starts off in hatcheries and is released into the wild. But that doesn't fall under the framework of aquaculture. If we actually start to allow open ocean permits to farm finfish properly, with organic feed, no chemicals, we will literally take over the world's seafood industry.
So if you had the option of purchasing farm raised or wild caught, what do you choose?
That's a tough question because it's not a catch-all, right? All oysters are farmed, all clams are farmed, all mussels are farmed, right? People
do you
think they're
then
wild.
The label means nothing?
Means nothing.
It's just marketing.
Labeling is all marketing.
It's just marketing.
Yeah.
So, don't go crazy trying to find the last piece of wild caught fish because you're probably going to be disappointed to learn that it's the same thing.
Well, when it says it's wild, it usually is wild. When it says it's farmed, it could be a combo of each. But they won't usually use wild versus farm. They'll usually say they'll put on like a fake certification label, or they'll say sustainable.
Well, how concerned are you about antibiotics in our seafood?
Not just our seafood, all of our food. Antibiotics is a major issue. I mean, all of our food is pumped full of antibiotic residue, especially seafood, because it's not just in the feed, it's in the ocean. And in places like Vietnam, Thailand, and China, they're dumping antibiotics on the fish to keep them healthy for a short period of time, and then freezing them and shipping them over to the United States. So I'm very worried about that. I mean, just last week, Lauren my wife needed to take antibiotics, and they didn't work. And the same antibiotics worked for my son. And I said, and once again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm speculating, but it's like, think about how much antibiotics we consume as we get older, just in all these residues, and it's going to stop working.
So what do you do for your kids if you want to feed them fish? Do you try to get fish that doesn't have antibiotics? Could one even do that?
Well, yeah, most fish doesn't. If you're buying U.S. wild, Mexican, or Canadian, they're really assessing it. And U.S. wild, buy U.S. wild.
Are some brands better than others? Are there ones that you can share with me that you'd say go ahead and buy that?
I will say this: Whole Foods has a really good seafood certification program. They have their own internal standards, and what they'll actually do is that they'll basically set up a certification program internally to make sure that it meets all the same international standards, and it's pretty good seafood.
So my kids love salmon, but I'm worried. Can I just buy salmon at Costco, at the market? Can I take them out to sushi and eat salmon? Yeah,
in the world of seafood, salmon is the least of my worries.
Really?
Right? Yeah, because most salmon that you're eating is either wild and it's coming from the United States, right? All wild salmon is coming from pretty much Alaska, or like those waters, the Bering Strait. And the farm salmon is coming from Canada, it's coming from Chile, it's coming from Norway or Scotland, and they do have really good sustainable seafood programs in place, or at least programs that are controlling what they're being fed, how they're being processed. Salmon is literally the least of my worries. The Asian market doesn't deal in salmon. They deal with whitefish, pangasius, catfish, tilapia, look out for the random whitefish that has a name that you don't understand. Look out for sea bass, because that's a catch-all term, or snapper. Ask exactly what type of sea bass or what type of snapper and where it comes from.
What about red snapper?
Red snapper that comes from the U.S. is great, but you'll find red snapper from Vietnam, and you're like, there's no red snapper in Vietnam.
There isn't?
No. It's like, that's the problem with the labeling. So once again, in conclusion, don't worry about salmon. And the idea that there's antibiotics in the feed.
Yes, antibiotics.
No. That was propaganda from like 10 to 15 years ago. There's no antibiotic use in salmon. They're healthy.
Wait, who would create propaganda that there is antibiotics in salmon?
I don't want to call anybody out, but let's just say their primary competition. Who's the primary competitor of farm salmon?
Beef?
No, although beef definitely subsidizes some of that.
Chicken?
Wild salmon.
Oh, the wild salmon.
Yeah, so
folks.
they were in a war. The wild salmon and farm salmon.
Oh, this is like literally the brothers and sisters fighting each other.
Yeah, and what they both didn't realize is that all boats rise with a high tide.
Yes.
Figured you'd like the pun. So if people are eating more salmon, it helps both of them. But yeah, there's a war. If you see bumper stickers that are like, friends don't let friends eat farm salmon.
Yeah.
Like there was a war, right? And I'll even post about aquaculture and how some fish farms are doing the right thing, and the wild salmon fishermen will want to kill me. But I also serve wild salmon at my restaurant. I serve both because they're not the same species. Farm salmon is Atlantic salmon.
Okay.
Wild salmon is one of 5 wild species: sockeye, pink, chum, coho, king. Those fish are as different as trout and shrimp in my mind. When you eat a piece of Atlantic salmon, they shouldn't call it salmon. They should call it like Atlantic pink fish. It is different than the other 5 wild salmon, Pacific salmon species.
The Atlantic pink fish, as you call it, is less fishy, right? That's
less
the less
fishy,
fishy
much milder,
flavor.
less fishy. There is no wild market for Atlantic salmon. It is commercially extinct. Thus, if they knew
But is it safe?
It's safe because it's being farmed, right? And it's being farmed in countries, Canada, which is managed by the Department of Fish and Oceans. Salmon farms have gotten a lot cleaner over the years. In the beginning, they did have some antibiotic use and they had issues. They've gotten so much cleaner. And they're being farmed where they're controlling the feed, so they know what they're feeding them. So Atlantic salmon is one fish, and then Pacific salmon or the wild salmon is another fish. One's farmed, one's wild. All your Pacific is wild, all your Atlantic. In the echelon, or I should say the pantheon of fish, you don't need to worry about salmon.
I'm so glad you're saying this because it's important to eat fish, right? I mean, we like it as part of our diets, and we've been scared that salmon, which is the easiest to get a hold of, is potentially really bad for us.
We have the lowest per capita consumption of seafood of most developed nations in the world, and most of the leading causes of death in the United States can be alleviated through some degree through a more regular consumption of healthy omega-3 fatty acids. I realized with my stomach issues that my inflammation was caused because my 3-to-6 ratio in my diet was so bad.
The omegas.
Omega 6 to 3. 100 years ago, it used to be 2 to 1, 6 to 3. Now it's 20 to 1. That's inflammation. And inflammation is the root of all problems. So when I cut out my seed oils, my 6s dropped and I started eating more seafood. That ratio came into balance. My inflammation went down, which was causing the inflammation of my stomach and my intestines and all of that.
Fascinating. Do you think some fish are better than others? Is there a favorite seafood that you would recommend?
Fish that eat other fish. So I don't only eat tilapia. It's a vegetable eater.
I don't like tilapia. It tastes like plastic to me, tilapia.
Because it doesn't eat other fish, so it has no omega-3 content. It's high in omega-6s, which is why they say tilapia is like bacon, right? Oh. So I eat fish that eat other fish, and then I also try and eat like fish, like middle scale fin fish. So things like barramundi, white sea bass, California white sea bass, halibut, California halibut, or Alaskan halibut. Black cod or sablefish is a wonderful fish from from the United States all the way up into Canada and then Alaska. On the East Coast, you've got rockfish, you've got Acadian redfish, you've got bluefish, you've got Atlantic cod, haddock, hake. We have hundreds of different species of the most amazing fish, and all we talk about is salmon, shrimp, and tuna.
It's true. It's true.
So it's like, so don't worry about salmon, eat as much as you want, right? Don't worry about generally eating seafood, because when you look at the cost-benefit analysis, eating more seafood, even if some of it maybe has a little bit of this or a little bit of that, is still better than when you're eating things that are high on the omega-6s and full of seed oils.
Because the omega-3s are so good for you.
Exactly. It's so good for you. And don't worry about mercury. That's another sensationalized headline.
Explain that. You're right. People are worried about mercury in fish.
No one's ever died from mercury poisoning in seafood.
Where did that come from?
In the history of the world. Because they need something to sensationalize. It probably, you want the truth?
Of course I want the truth.
Of course, but I don't want to do it at the expense of somebody else, but I'm sure that propaganda was funded by like the Beef Association of America or some other trade industry. That's what they do.
Some other big food mafia just wanted to attack.
And that's the problem, is when we start demarketing other proteins at the expense of Americans' health, that's just bad.
So bad.
Yeah. So don't worry about mercury. Jeremy Piven said he got mercury poisoning from eating seafood, right? And so did Tony Robbins. And by the way, they were fine, but they claimed that. And I remember this like 5 or 10 years ago. And when they did, they said, "What have you been eating?" "Oh, I eat sushi." "How much?" For lunch and what else? For dinner?" "What kind of sushi?" "Bluefin tuna." So you eat bluefin tuna sushi, which by the way is like $200 a meal, for lunch and dinner, 60 days straight. Okay, yes, you might bioaccumulate a little bit of mercury, and it might be an issue. Most Americans aren't doing that. So I wouldn't eat bluefin tuna, which is it's a top predator. So the idea is that
you would not eat bluefin tuna
every single day.
Oh, but you would eat bluefin tuna in general.
I'll eat it 3 times a week.
Yes.
If I can.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Shark. The ones you have to be careful of are, you ready for this? Shark. I don't think anyone's overindulging on shark.
No.
Bluefin tuna. Well, it's great because I don't eat it that much. It's $500 a pound. Or tilefish.
Tile fish?
Tile fish. Have you ever eaten a tile fish?
I've never heard of a tile fish.
Exactly. Like, it sounds like something we'd get at Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yes.
So don't worry about it. You should be eating a lot more seafood. If you are concerned about mercury, just think about the food chain, because the top predators, they consume down the food chain and it bioaccumulates. That's the scientific definition as to how that happens. But nobody's eating shark, tilefish, or bluefin every single day. Everything below, enjoy it.
Andrew, what about shrimp and cholesterol?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on cholesterol.
Yes.
But I would say—
We've done some of those.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have higher cholesterol in the shrimp, but is that what's killing us, or is it the sugar and the refined carbs that are killing us?
Yeah. I want to go back to your activism a little bit, because you're obviously so passionate, not just about food, but about your community, and you're getting involved with MAHA and education, and you wrote this book. I'm curious, what led you to be an activist? I mean, so many people I know who are in the restaurant business are so busy already, right? You're running around after these bureaucracies. You're trying to feed people with fresh, clean food. And if that's not enough, you go ahead and also get so involved. Where did that come from? Was it the lockdowns?
Yeah, it came from the lockdowns unleashed something that was brewing inside of me. So I was always involved in politics, love social and political philosophy. My mother was involved in politics by virtue of her business. She was an urban planner, right? So that's all about like local politics. My father was on the periphery, and I volunteered for senators growing up. I was the president of the Young Republicans Club, Model UN, Youth in Government. Like, I love politics and government, but as a hobby. Then as I started opening my own business, I realized all of that kind of theory, I saw it in real practice in real time. And there was this kind of like eureka moment for me where it was like, oh, so this is why we want limited government. I know in theory, but now I understand it.
Feel it.
And then I went through, 2010, 2012, 15, and kind of kept my mouth shut. Started doing a lot of TV then. I was doing like Food Network, and then I moved over to another network, and always knew in that world too, you keep your mouth shut about politics, right? But had my opinions. And it was it probably was the pandemic. I was like, enough of this. Like, I know.
Did it hurt you? Did it hurt your career, I guess, in TV as a TV chef?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it definitely hurt me. Definitely hurt me. Not only the TV and the media element, but just like I got dropped from boards that I was on. I got dropped, tons of business dropped. But I'll tell you what, our restaurant business went up 500%.
The people love you.
Well, it's not they love me. They love when other people speak out, and they respect that. And people want to spend their money places that are at principled businesses. They don't have to agree with you either. I have a lot of customers who are like, I fundamentally disagree with you, but you're consistent.
Wow, that is so interesting.
I think all these people who are like, well, you don't say anything, just stick to this or stick to that. It's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. That doesn't mean you have to be an a-hole.
Right.
Like, you can be open-minded, and I don't always agree with everybody in my kind of political, with the dogma associated.
Sure.
But you just be open, honest, and people understand then that you have a calculus behind how and why you make decisions.
So being involved in local community and local boards is it Huntington Beach, California?
Huntington Beach, yeah, I live in Huntington Beach.
What kind of a difference has it made? I'm sure people ask you all the time, Andrew, how can you run a business in California? Are you just a masochist? But I'm also curious, Huntington Beach is kind of an example of the rebels, right? And you've kind of sheltered yourselves against the lockdowns, and there is an amazing active community of people like you there. Has it truly made a difference being involved in local elections there?
Well, being involved locally is important because you understand how to navigate through that regulatory group, right? And it goes local, state, federal, and beyond. But I also think that local politics are important because that's where it starts. That's what you see every single day, right? So when you get up in the morning, you go to your car and your car hasn't been broken into, local politics. You go out onto the street, you drive to work, you don't get a flat because you didn't hit a pothole, local politics. You go and you work, and then you go have a nice lunch, and you're able to go out to a restaurant that's clean and there's no crime, local politics. You drive home, you take your kids to sports, local politics, right? You get home, you had a pretty nice day without too many speed bumps in the middle of the day. Let's take Los Angeles. You go outside, your car's broken into. Shoot, I don't have a car to get to work. Call an Uber. The guy's driving you to work because you have to go and make money. Hits a pothole. You got a flat tire. Local politics, right? Because the pothole wasn't fixed. You get to work. You want to go out for lunch. You end up Ubering food in or DoorDash or whatever. There's a $30 fee on there because of local California city council rates and wage mandates, especially when it comes to food delivery. $30 more out of your pocket. You're in a bad mood, you get home, you can't take your kids to sports because there's no more sports fields because they've been taken over by the homeless population. Local politics. Every element of our day is local politics. When we get on our phones and we start talking smack back and forth, that's federal politics. That's all just vanity, right?
Virtual.
Yeah, exactly. It all starts locally.
So do you think you guys were able to somewhat inoculate yourselves against the horrific California laws to some degree?
We weren't able to inoculate ourselves. We were able to hedge against them, right? So it's a hedging game. Maybe we were short selling a little bit ourselves. So it's understanding what laws are coming down and then figuring out how you're going to dodge against them.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you a little bit about the schools, specifically the schools in California. And I ran a school here. It was a private school, but it doesn't matter. We have all the safe food regulations, which I noticed both as an educator and as a parent, that the actual safe food that we're bringing into schools is actually garbage, because the safe food is the packaged, processed food. The healthier food, what I would think is healthier, is something that is fresh and alive. But oftentimes you can't bring that stuff into schools because it's not safe enough, right? It hasn't been sprayed with enough chemicals to kill every single bacteria on it. And how much work have you been able to put into that as you're looking to get more involved with the MAHA movement? How do we feed our kids better en masse?
Well, I think we need it's a whole mindset shift, right? So that's a great analogy, because that's what we think is safe and healthy food, is food that's been completely stripped down of any nutrients and then built back up in a lab. Not a literal lab. In some cases, it is a literal lab. But it's almost like, putting white on a canvas and repainting a picture from what once was a Picasso. And we need to realize is that we don't have to do that huge step. That comes from industrialization. That comes from kind of like this industrial agricultural complex that has forced us to think of food as a vehicle through which we can fortify and add back ingredients and make it safe. That's not safe food. That's dangerous food. And that's where the mindset shift needs to come in. And we need to recognize that the more food is broken down, the more dangerous it is.
So how do you solve for that? I mean, MAHA sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And, make Americans healthy, make children healthy. Are there actual pragmatic solutions that we can bring to the table and say, it started with no more red dye. Should it be no more blue dye? Should it no yellow dye, no bleach? Like what are we actually asking for as citizens?
Yeah, and this is the conflict of we want less government, but then we're asking the government to help us.
Yes.
Right? And pragmatism doesn't even necessarily fall into that formula. So I would say it's first and foremost, remove the government, right? Like the government is what got us here. The FDA, the USDA, the HHS, all of that growing bigger and bigger and bigger while chronic diseases go up, up, and up, right? So we need to completely remove the government, and that means removing them from the supply chain. Once we get the government out of the supply chain, then the big, massive food manufacturers no longer have the economic power to be jamming all that stuff down our throats and offering it as the only option of food that we buy. We need small, medium-sized farmers to start entering the supply chain from below so we can get real foods, unprocessed foods that then we as families, as communities, can process ourselves versus allowing them to do it at the top. So there's really kind of like there's a macro change that needs to occur, and that's in regards to federal subsidies, breaking down the supply chain. Then there's a micro change that needs to occur on a community level where we're cooking more, we're eating more, and we're able to have better access to local foods. We're in California. It's the produce capital of the world. Why is everything on the shelves from Argentina and Mexico and Costa Rica and all these other countries? Like all of that should be feeding first our community here and then expanding beyond into Arizona and neighboring states and then across the United States. So I'll use this as a perfect opportunity to transition into tariffs.
Yes, because that was my next question. How do you feel about the tariffs?
The tariffs are great.
You're not worried that the tariffs are going to hurt you? You're going to have to buy fish for your restaurant at 35% tariff now, or I don't know what it's going to be?
No, because I already buy all the right products that are expensive to begin with. I eat that cost. One of the things I do in my restaurant is that I probably serve my food. My food cost is 10% higher than the industry standard because I know that I'm going to eat the cost on the food and serve better food at a lower price. I'm going to make up for it elsewhere within the way in which I run my business. That's just being smart and creative. You figure it out, right? But so it's not going to affect me directly in that sense because I'm not buying the junk from China. So yeah, the people who are might have to increase their prices a little bit. And guess what? That might drive people to my restaurant where they're getting good food and we're getting the right types of food, which means that the U.S. fishermen end up having more business and then it stimulates their industry. So tariffs economically are stupid, but they're not being used for economic purposes. They're being used as a leverage point right now in order to get U.S. producers to have attention so that we can stimulate that industry.
So do you foresee the negotiations over tariffs as an opportunity to empower the local farmers, the local fishermen to actually fish more and then provide more food that is grown and, I guess, processed in the United States?
Yes, or to incentivize investment, right? So investors and people who have the cash, who are willing to make the investments, they're looking out at the future 1, 2, 3 years. So if they know that that industry is being protected by virtue of tariffs, then they're going to invest in those industries. The investment goes into an industry that otherwise would have been getting smaller. Well, now it's going to get much larger, and now they're going to be able to access the supply chain easier, and then we can buy their products.
Well, this would only work if you actually lower the regulations here in the United States as well, right?
Of course, 100%. So you have to, it's a multifaceted approach, right? Like you can't just put tariffs on and then leave the regulations in place. You have to also deregulate. It's about deregulation, changing the incentive structure, and then education. So first we got to create the demand. The demand starts with the education, understanding what we're eating. That's MAHA, and they've already succeeded. People ask me, what can RFK do? Well, he's already done it. Everybody's talking about it, right?
Start the conversation.
Yep. Then we need to deregulate so that all the small and medium-sized farmers aren't pushed out of the market by virtue of onerous regulations. Things like not being able to ship products across state lines. Things like having to use USDA-approved facility that only the big guys can use. So they can never—
Why can only the big guys use these USDA facilities?
Because they have all the product. You see, it's a mafia. It's a cartel.
The food mafia.
It's the food mafia, the meat mafia, the chicken mafia. You have, in order to sell your products interstate, like from one state to another, your product has to be inspected by a USDA-approved facility, federally approved facility. There's not enough facilities for all of the farmers to be able to get it approved. So all the small farmers sell to the packers who are integrated vertically with the big guys. So your only choice is to sell to the big guys. You're never going to get to that USDA facility because they've merged with the government and they've created a cartel, corporatism. Well, now that they only have one person to sell to, the buyer, the mafia, they'll determine everything. You have to put antibiotics in your meat if you want me to buy it. They have no choice, no independence. You have to do this if you want me to buy it, right? It's their livelihood. So if you say—
Not to mention them controlling the prices.
And controlling the price. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. You're right. Control, price fixing, all of that. But now if you say, and this is why Thomas Massey created Prime Act, so that you don't have to be approved by a USDA facility, that local farmers can sell interstate, right? He introduced that years ago and nothing's happened with it. Do you know that it's easier to buy Australian meat in the United States than it is to buy US raised meat?
Why?
Because the rule is that if it's an international product, right, then it just has to be inspected in a facility locally, so in Australia or New Zealand or wherever, that kind of meets and matches the same standards as the USDA, and then they bypass that requirement. So Australia says, well, we have our version of a USDA. So they ship it in anywhere in the United States. But then, Joe, the local regenerative farmer in Idaho, goes, well, this New Zealand stuff's going around everywhere. Why can't I sell it too? And they're like, oh, you have to go to a USDA facility. So it's that we need that U.S.
It's anti-American. That's what it is. And so then I guess that what they would do is they'll say, okay, well, let me ship it out to China or Australia and have it shipped back into the United States so I don't have to deal with the local. It is mind-boggling that this is happening.
It's backwards. It's upside down. And that's why so much of our ground beef comes from Brazil. We talk about the rainforests.
These are our cows.
Well, they're Brazilian cows.
And we'll send them to Brazil?
No, Brazil. It's Brazilian meat that ships into the United States, and then we grind.
It's the Brazilian meat.
We grind in ground beef, then that goes into like every McDonald's and all of these major food manufacturers into their products. And And they're ruining the rainforest.
Do you think it's nefarious, or is it just a system that is out of control? Because that's what happens when you give an inch to the government.
Bingo. You give an inch to the government, it gets out of control, and what started off as an unintended consequence becomes nefarious. There's nefarious players taking advantage of the spiral. I don't think the original intention was nefarious, although you could say that it is and say, well, of course, because they want more power, that in and of itself. But I don't think somebody 60 years ago said, in 60 years, all of our meat's going to be coming from Brazil. But they're okay with the fact that it's
the unintended consequences, supposedly, of a big government, essentially.
I'll get very grand here, and then I'll get off my soapbox. We are a constitutional republic. In a democracy, when you have majority rule, you run into situations where people lose their power. When people lose their power, it becomes very autocratic, right? The strongest countries in history over hundreds and thousands of years have been countries in which the people have the power. We've lost our power over the past 50 years, as seen through food. And it's only going to get worse if we continue on this path. If we need to give the power back to the people and remember that we are a constitutional republic and give the power to the states, to the local communities, like we're talking about. So there's, I'm not going to live somewhere where there's potholes in the road, and give me the power here locally. If we do that, we will continue being the strongest country in the world, and it can be done through food. And that's kind of my platform, if you will. If
you started a conversation with a child about food, what would you say to them, just as a way to get started, to have just a different view of how do they take care of their bodies, and how do they have autonomy and responsibility over what's going in?
Well, first thing I'd ask them is, do you know where food comes from? That's a child or an adult.
The supermarket.
Bingo. There you go. Well, where is it before that?
Right.
Let's walk through the supply chain. See, that's the thing. That's hilarious you said the supermarket, because you're right. A child wouldn't just answer that way. An adult would answer that way as well. And that's not a pejorative, right? That's the reality. We need to know where our food comes from, because now, as I'm explaining it to you, if the audience listening hears this, or when they hear this, I imagine many of them are going to say, oh, that's disgusting. Like, I don't want that meat from Brazil being ground up in this meat. Like, I thought my burger at the steakhouse, that cow was just walking around having a great time, smoking a cigarette, and then bam, he was on my plate.
Yeah, or the Alaskan fish sent to China to be processed and then sent back here. Yeah. It is pretty jarring to hear this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say I think every family should visit a farm on a regular basis. Americans should see what America is about. And that's the other thing with our four-walled schools. They don't do that. They don't actually show kids where food really comes from.
Every single school should have a garden. They should have some sort of a garden, whether it produces anything of with any fruit, literally or figuratively, that's irrelevant. Just understanding kind of like the ecosystem, right? And the biodynamic nature of the ecosystem, which we then eat and then we release in fertilizer, and how that cycle of life works, right? Easier to see it than to talk about it. And then, especially in inner cities now, there's so much innovation in regards to vertical, not just vertical farming, but vertical aquaponics. So that's the integration of aquaculture and fish farming with vegetables. We started a garden at the Huntington Beach High School with the science teacher there, and we were growing and producing enough food and fish for one of our restaurants, and all of the students managed the garden. They figured out the market price. They sold it back to us. We bought it. We funded the garden. All the fish would sit in a pond. They were organic, right? 100% organic, and we actually took them from hatchling in a greenhouse, and we farmed them there. And we only fed them the vegetable scraps from the vegetables that were connected, that were growing. And then the nitrogen from their poop went up and fed the vegetables. And it was this closed loop system.
How hard was that to build in your community?
It wasn't difficult at all. But then what ended up happening was, it's the regulation as to where does it go. And then somebody came in the middle of the night and stole all the fish.
Well, that teaches them another lesson.
Well, it does. Crime. That's why you need more money in the budget for police.
Yeah. Yeah. What's in your book? So you wrote this book. This is a family cooking book?
Yeah, it's a family cookbook, 50 recipes. We did this in partnership with Brave Books, which is an amazing organization. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Yeah, you have 4 kids.
Yeah.
Cute. They're so cute.
I've got 4 kids. My wife likes to say 5. And each one of these recipes, there's nothing overly intellectual here. These are dishes you know and understand, but we add our own little spin to them using real ingredients. There's no seed oils, nothing processed. It's all about taking dishes people know and just making them fresh at home. So
you're okay
fries,
with carbs and sugars.
Yeah, in a limited way. Yeah, it's the unrefined carbs and sugars, right? The refined carbs and sugars. It's the high fructose corn syrup. It's the manipulation, the scientific manipulation of the carbs and the sugars.
You like avocado oil?
I do. I use avocado oil because it's not a seed oil. It's lower on the linoleic acid scale, and it's got a high smoke point.
Okay, let's do a game then.
All right.
You ready for this? Rapid fire. Let's see. Chef Andrew, vegetable oil or beef tallow?
Oh, beef tallow all day. You'll never find vegetable oil anywhere near my kitchen. You'll find it near my car engine. That's about it.
What if you're baking something that you don't want to have a flavor of beef?
Lard.
Okay. Steak or fish?
Depends on the meal, but I will usually just go with surf and turf.
You want both, you greedy.
Yep.
Fine dining or food truck?
I'll say hole in the wall, whether that's a food truck or a diner, all day. I hate fine dining.
Okay, it's your birthday. Are you spending time at home cooking with the family or going to a Michelin-rated restaurant?
Oh, I'm at home with the family. There's nothing better than cooking with your family. Like, and you've got kids, you know this. It's like one person's in the kitchen, we're picking, we're cooking, we're running around, somebody's doing something else, then they're in the kitchen. I mean, it is everything for us.
You're not going to the French Laundry with our great Governor Newsom?
I said I will only go eat at the French Laundry during our next lockdown.
Okay, what food brings you back the best memories?
Probably pizza because I'm from New Jersey, New York. But, generally like hot dogs. I remember a lot of my memories are growing up with just me and my dad and doing things, right? As a young boy, looks up to his father. I remember my dad, hot dogs were his favorite. And the one thing that he would cook for me is he said he did it in the Army. He would take a hot dog and he would put it in aluminum foil and put cheese on top of it and stick it in the oven. So when it was boys' night, that's what we would eat.
Does that count as a cheat, or are you okay eating those things on a regular basis?
Not on a regular basis. I mean, and once again, we can't let perfect ruin good here. You're always going to have indulgent items, and every now and then, like, you might eat cotton candy, right? Like, nobody's a purist in any of this sense.
Well, some people have been here who are purists, but I guess you're balanced.
Well, I might be a purist, but I'm not going to mandate that you're a purist.
Well, that's for sure. Is there anybody dead or alive that you wish you could have cooked a meal with, or you might still?
Dead or alive that I wish I could have cooked a meal with? Well, probably my grandmother and great-grandmother. So the Italian side of my family, they owned restaurants and apparently were great cooks. They passed before I really remember much, but I hear stories from my mother. So I would like to know what our culinary heritage looks like.
Yeah, it's in your DNA.
Yeah.
What is the most meaningful and complicated meal you've ever cooked?
Kubiak de salmon. So it's like a salmon in pastry with it's got layers and levels of like culinary expertise. But in essence, think of it as like the seafood version of a beef Wellington. But you've got to make brioche dough yourself fresh and wrap it around the salmon.
Where did you make it?
Well, I used to do a lot of French cooking and cooking competitions, and I had to make it when I was training under a certified master chef.
All right, I'm going to try to make one of those. We'll see. Maybe you'll teach me. What is one lesson that you learned from running all your businesses that you will take with you to your grave?
Pay more, treat people well, and your business is going to do well. So treat people literally like family. I know there's this idea that you got to be tough and you got to be strong and, hire slow and fire fast. But when you find the right people, if you don't take care of them and figure out how to make room for them on your balance sheet, your business is not going to thrive. Sustainability from a business perspective is about the people that are holding you up, and it's not your vision.
What do you look for when hiring someone?
Honesty. That's all.
And how do you get to the heart and mind of a picky eater?
I find out what they like, and then I slowly pepper in new items and tastes and flavors. Most of the time, we like something because it's more than just the taste and flavor. It's the emotion and the experience we have with that item. So if you use that as the vehicle through which you can introduce new flavors, then you can grow from there.
There is so much that is being eroded in our culture when it comes to what is true and what is beautiful and what is noble. And here at PragerU, that's what we try to bring back to everybody's lives. And final words on how you intend on doing that through your cuisine.
Well, I want to fix the food system with as you say, pragmatic, and I'll bring that back, pragmatic policy and an approach that allows everybody across all walks of life to be able to eat the right types of food. I want to use food as the kind of prism through which we can talk about policy and government and liberty and freedom and all those things that matter in our daily lives, and just continue making it relevant and easy to understand or digest. And I think that's the problem. What we've dealt with over the past 10 to 20 years is obfuscation. We've purposefully confused, I can never pronounce the word well, but we've purposefully confused the American people by way of complicated policy to the degree that they've said, I don't know, I'll let them figure it out. I got stuff I got to deal with today. Yeah. But it doesn't need to be that way. Power to the people. It's not that complicated. It's really not. And as long as we understand the basic principles, and I firmly believe food is the language that we can use to educate everybody in that regard.
I love it. Power to the people. It's not that complicated.
Yep.
It's a great way to end it.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.